The first myth is that the Novus Ordo fulfills Vatican II. This is what was stated in Traditionis Custodes. It's been said again in various decrees of bishops that if you have any sort of critique of the Novus Ordo as promulgated, or if you want the Latin Mass instead of Novus Ordo, you are rejecting Vatican II. So here's Father Joseph Ratzinger in 1976. He says, quote, "I can say with certainty from my knowledge of the council debate and from rereading the speeches of the council fathers delivered at the time that this Novus Ordo was not intended by them." And then he says again in 86, this is after he's become a bishop and a cardinal, quote, "In part, it is simply a fact that the council was pushed aside. The new missal was published as if it were a book put together by professors, not a phase in a continual growth process. Such a thing has never happened before. It is absolutely contrary to the laws of liturgical growth," end quote.
Might as well start with the elephant in the room now, that the Novus Ordo is what it is in its essence and its nature. That is to say, what it is intrinsically, not extrinsically, but intrinsically. Because the Concilium, which is the committee that was put together to create the new rite, with, unfortunately, the approval of Pope Paul VI, explicitly rejected the letter of Sacrosanctum Concilium. Sacrosanctum Concilium said, do this, and they said, no, we're going to do that instead. So, and so unfortunately what's happened is that you people start from the a priori assumption and lay aside the question of why they do this, because motivations vary from person to person, but they start from the a priori assumption that the liturgy as we have it in the Novus Ordo is what Vatican II asked for, and work backwards from that. But it's simply, if you start from Sacrosanctum Concilium work forwards, it's just indefensible. And there are innumerable examples I can give. The fastest one, because it's the easiest one, one of the easiest ones to explain. Paragraph 92 of Sacrosanctum Concilium talks about the readings of the lives of the saints in the breviary. So, and the custom of reading the life of a saint is a thing that goes back as far back as the liturgy goes. We have several cases where we have the acts of martyrdom preserved. People like Saint Cyprian or the martyrs of the Massa Candida in Africa. And the reason why we have them is that people went to the courts and got copies of the acts, and then they read them in the liturgy. And we have church fathers attesting this explicitly. In the Ambrosian Rite to this day, they still read them in the Mass on certain feast days. So the first reading is actually not from the scriptures, it's from the life of the saint. In the Roman Rite, we do this in the breviary. So Sacrosanctum Concilium refers explicitly to keeping up this custom, because it says that these lives of the saints that are read in the breviary have to be conformed to the facts of history, which say we don't want, false legends included in them. And what the committee that created the new Liturgy of the Hours did was they simply took out all of them. There are a couple of exceptions where the religious orders of the saints were protested, and so they put them back. But so you don't read the lives of the saints at all in the divine office anymore. You read an edifying thing written by the saint. In some cases, Saint Cecilia is patron saint of music, so they don't read anything about her life at all. They read a treatise from Saint Augustine about how great music is. So, this is simply, flat out defiance of the letter of Sacrosanctum Concilium. And that what I just said about that one paragraph, you can take most of the paragraphs of Sanctum Concilium and just sort of multiply it forward from there. So, and then this is the great elephant in the room, is that there is too little willingness to deal with the fact that the liturgical reform is not the fulfillment of Vatican II. But in the same way that, it's often extremely difficult to persuade a rationalist that miracles happen. I mean, there are a lot of people who simply don't want to deal with this issue and this problem. So, they would simply reject this premise on one ground or another to various degrees of speciousness. But no, I mean, and that's how. I mean, this is as Dr. Kwasniewski described it. This is the one point on which everything is balanced. That we have to embrace the Novus Order to accept Vatican II, but the Novus Order itself rejects Vatican II.
Can you comment on the 67 Synod of Bishops? This was when the Novus Ordo was presented to a group of bishops, and Michael Davies, in his text, Pope Paul's New Mass, mentions the numbers where the Novus Ordo was presented, and there is 71 votes, yes, they approved it as is. 43 voted no, they do not approve it as is. And 62 said yes, but, meaning they wanted something changed in the Novus Ordo. So it was not approved as is, but there was a general on the yes side, and there was 4 abstentions. So the evidence seems to suggest, Gregory, that there was a quite a dispute among the bishops about the Novus Ordo, and even goes into the 70s when Bonini is sacked, and there's a lot of opposition to him. Yves Chiron says this has nothing to do with Freemasonry. There's just a big opposition from the CDF coming at him.
Sure.
Can you comment at all about on the question of does it fulfill Vatican II, about the bishops' disputes among themselves about the Novus Ordo?
Well, there clearly were many bishops, and some of them very prominent individuals. The Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster, for example, who famously said about that particular mass that he saw in 1967, that the people who created this have obviously never been parish priests. And if this is what the liturgy is going to be like, there'll be nothing left but old women and children in our churches, which unfortunately has to no small degree proved true. But it is certainly true that the process took place in tremendous haste. So, a missal was issued in 1965, which made a number of rubrical adjustments, a few changes, the removal of the last gospel, and Psalm 42. The doxology at the end of the canon was said out loud, and it seemed like, okay, that's we're done. So I don't think it's particularly well done, but it was done. So at the time, it was just assumed that was the process. So essentially, this whole thing is happening in 4 years. And what this means is that there is no time for the whole thing to be properly studied and reviewed, that you're basically tearing down and rebuilding the entire liturgy, which, the church has poured 1,500 years of its creative force and its pastoral experience into this thing, and you're tearing the whole thing down and rebuilding it in 4 years. So, of course, the bishops were very dissatisfied in a whole bunch of ways. And that episode is one expression of their dissatisfaction. Unfortunately, there was no interest on the part of the Concilium really in paying attention to their suggestions, because they knew that at a certain point there would be a backlash, and they would be shut down, as happened. So they just did everything as rapidly as they could, knowing that their window in which to push all this stuff through was very narrow. And Cardinal Antonelli, who was a member of the Concilium and very much in favor of the reform, of the idea of reform, not that reform per se, said, everybody here has come here to bring their own bright ideas into it. So in 1967, what the bishops are seeing is a liturgy based on the bright ideas and pet projects of the individual members of the Concilium, and that's just what they went with. And so